Ну что ж, уважаемые коллеги,
Dear colleagues,
дорогие друзья, добрый день.
dear friends, good afternoon.
Открываем заседание
Let me
диссертационного
declare open
совета
a session of the Dissertation Council for the defense
диссертации
of
Любимовой Анжелы
thesis by
Олеговны
Liubimova,
на
Anzhela,
соискание
Olegovna
ученой
for the
степени
degree of
кандидата политических
candidate of
наук по
political
специальности.
science,
Ну что ж,
academic specialization
уважаемые коллеги,
23004,
проблемы
political
международных
problems of
отношений,
international
глобального и
relations,
регионального
global and
развития.
regional development.
Тема
The
диссертационного исследования
theme of the
международное измерение
thesis is
деятельности
International Dimension
крайне
of
правых партий
European Union
Европейского Союза
Extreme Right Parties Performance,
на примере
a
национального
case
объединения
study
Франции
of
и
the
партии
French National
независимости
Rally and
Соединенного
United Kingdom
Королевства.
Independence
Прошу
Party.
считать заседание открытым.
Let me declare the session open.
Информация. Приказом
Information on the
Санкт-Петербургского
order of
государственного
St. Petersburg
университета
University
25 марта
dated the
2020
25th of
года,
March
номер
2020,
2406,
number
дробь 1, я,
2406/1,
Межевич Николай
me,
Маратович,
Mezhevich
доктор
Nikolai Maratovich,
экономических наук,
Professor, Doctor of
профессор
Economics,
кафедры
Professor of the
европейских
Department of European
исследований,
Studies,
назначен председателем
St. Petersburg
данного
University, was
диссертационного
appointed
совета.
chairman of this dissertation
Этим же
council.
приказом
Same
утверждены
order
члены диссертационного совета,
appointed members of
присутствующие
the
сейчас
dissertation council present
на заседании. Вне протокола для
at
тех
today's
коллег,
session,
которые меня не
of
знают лично,
record
они
for colleagues who
есть,
don't know
их
me
немного, но они
personally.
есть.
A
Сообщаю,
few
что
colleagues don't know me personally. Let me inform you
ученое
that
звание доцента и ученое звание профессора
the
получено
degree of
мною по
associate
кафедре мировой
professor
политики,
is
а не по
awarded to me, the
каким-либо
world
экономическим
politics
специальностям.
department,
В
not
соответствии с
in any
приказом
economical specialization.
СПбГУ
Under the order of St. Petersburg University, on the 3rd of March 2020, number 2304/1, our meeting is held in remote access mode.
В этом режиме мы все и находимся.
So we are all present in this mode.
Совета,
members of the council, most of them are familiar with each other. Irina Vladimировna Zelenova, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of World Politics, St. Petersburg University. Can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. That's good. Ruslan Vasilyevich Kostyuk, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theory and History of International Relations in Petersburg University. Ruslan Vasilyevich, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you. Same is true about me. Alexander Yurovich Sungurov, Doctor of Political Science, Professor of Department of Applied Political Science of the National Research University of the Higher School of Economics. Can you see us? Yes, all is well. I'm glad to see all of you. The same, it goes both ways. And it's good to see our colleague from Kazakhstan, Doctor of Political Science, Head of the Department of Regional Studies of Eurasian National University, named after Lev Gumilyov, Kazakhstan. Can you see us? Can you hear us? I'm sorry, I didn't give it. Ospanova, Aigerim Nuraliyev. Yes, I can see and I can hear you. Thank you. And the reason for us being here, our degree applicant, Liubimova Anzhela Olegovna. Can you see us? Can you hear us? Yes, thank you. I can see and hear you. Thank you. Maybe you can turn the volume up. And under the regulation, the academic advisor of the applicant of Natalia Valerievna Yeremina, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of European Studies of St. Petersburg University. Can you see us? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Very well, thank you. We can also see and hear you. Okay, let's agree on that and move on. The procedure is quite similar to the traditional one, but since we are working in the remote access mode, I invite all the participants and Ruslan Vasilyevich, in case there is a technical failure. blackout. This happened already in April. Colleagues to take over and continue running the procedure. Okay. Well, then, dear colleagues, I have one more request, quite traditional for Zoom meetings. Please keep the video on, but remember to switch off the sound. Those council members who are not speaking while you're not speaking, this you can do in the bottom left corner of the screen. Next, the applicant's page currently displays an email address to which, during the session of our council, all the listeners of the session may give their opinions and send questions to the degree applicant. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical department, and I shall read them out during the discussion. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of her thesis, and naturally, questions or other questions shall not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding degrees of candidate of science and doctor of science approved by local regulations of St. Petersburg University, duly authorized, a meeting of the dissertation council is considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the council, but not less than 4 persons, take part in its work. This requirement we fully meet because our council consists of 5 members, and as I understand, all the 5 members are present. Thus, we have the quorum, and audio-visual contact has been established. And I instruct dear Karasova Irina Nikolaevna Vasilyevna, officer of the Dissertation Council's support department, to draw up the attendance list in which the Dissertation Council members and their work mode should be indicated, in our case, remote. The total approximate duration of today's session shall be 2 hours. So this first we should start with the chairman's summary report on documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations. If there are any questions regarding documents, which happens in classical meetings also, then we shall proceed to a brief presentation of the, and let me interrupt myself, open the document and colleagues, if I am right, the degree applicant submitted papers which outline the key results from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education, Russian Federation, and in peer-reviewed scientific journals, Web of Science and Scopus. There are no publications which for this type of thesis is not a must. So I don't have any further information, and I ask Irina Vladimirovna to clarify if I mentioned other. I think everything is correct. Thank you. Then let me give the floor to Anzhela Olegovna for her presentation. The duration her speech shall not exceed, as in the standard mode, not exceed 15 minutes. Anzhela Olegovna, may I ask for 1 minute? I started my presentation. Good afternoon, dear Dissertation Council members. Let me introduce to you a presentation which outlines the key points of my study of international dimension of the EU extreme right party's performance, case study, the French National Rally, and the UK Independence Party. The phenomenon of success of the extreme right movement in the European Union is an important topic of political research in the late 20th and the 21st century. Over the past few years, there's been a significant increase in support for the right-wing and extreme right parties in Europe, as evidenced by the electoral success. Their results and activities, one of the most successful representatives of the Western Union, the National Union, and the Independence Party are particularly striking examples of that. The current problems of recent decades, inability of European governments to cope with them, led to increase in skepticism and populism in the European Union. The economic crisis, which led to high taxes and unemployment, the problem of immigration, deepening of the integration program, primarily at the political and economic levels, which affected the growth of the national identity. And there's a number of other challenges which became reasons for strengthening of the extreme right parties at the present stage. Search of an alternative option, citizens of the European Union turned to extreme right parties that offer a different way of developing the European states. It should be mentioned that today the extreme right parties no longer small marginal associations. They are in position political force within the framework of legitimate field, strengthening their position both at the national and international levels. Today, they gradually becoming leading political forces, not only within the states, but also at the international level. They actively promote their views, interests, not limited to political work in the European Parliament. Transnational parties is going is on the rise currently, which is transnational parties as a part in the party cooperation, supported by some states and politicians, which can address inner and external number of tasks. Such cooperation, in some cases, is positive and supported to strengthen ties. And in the case of study of extreme right-wing parties, their cooperation is usually observed before the elections to European Parliament. In 2014 European elections were considered a victory for Eurosceptics and populists despite the fact that elections of 2019 generally 2016 was the most important event in history of European integration, Brexit, which also in France Marie Le Pen managed to fought for the presidential seat and passed first and the second rounds. Alternative for Germany won third place in the Bundestag and therefore became a federal level party. Thus, a political context shows that these parties are developing and getting more support. It's also important that it's more successful combined with problems of internal development. And for this reason, their views on the need for radical changes in relation to foreign policy of the states and development of the European Union require a detailed analysis. Thus, the author thought it is necessary to study international activities of such parties as a new significant sign of their growing influence and their desire to form international groups, the so-called far-right internationals, in order to jointly determine and influence at least the current agenda in Europe. Next, I'd like to outline the purpose of my thesis, which is to determine factors, forms, and mechanism of interaction of the far-right parties in Europe in the context of European and globalization processes. This goal shall be achieved through a study of the national unity and UK independence parties, international trends in development of extreme right parties in Europe, and the subject of my study, the international activities of the far-right parties of European Union on the example of National Rally and Independence Party. Next, I'd like to identify the objectives of my thesis, identify the logical institutional basis of the modern far-right parties of European Union, highlight the special features of ideology of the extreme right in Western Europe, since the parties under study belong to these geographical regions. Third, determine how the effect of globalization and European integration affects the development of the far-right parties. Fourth, compare political activities of extreme right in relation to European agenda. For example, earlier mentioned National Rally and Independence. Five, compare political views of the party leaders, the development of the far-right parties, including issues of international cooperation. Identify problems of European integration on the agenda of the extreme right. Identify prospects for international cooperation for the extreme right. And finally, find out the position of the extreme right in relation to the interaction of the European Union with Russia and the impact of this factor on their development. Also, I'd like to mention that I used an impressive number of sources in Russian, English, and French, which included documents, fundamental documents of the European Union, European Parliament, official sites and sources. Special attention is paid to party program, National Rally and Independence Party programs. 2015 and 2017 special, I'd like to draw your attention that while selecting, I introduced a new document, interview the author of the thesis interviewed, Jean-Marie Le Pen, where I was able to ask her questions which interested me and disclose the tasks that were relevant for the task of this study. Also, I'd like to say that in general, the theme of extreme right cooperation, development of the extreme right parties, their classification and development were quite well described in the works of national and international authors. Among the international authors, I'd like Griffin, Kitschelt, Ignat Mickenberg. I'd like to specially emphasize that exchange with the Milan University was possible to hold a face-to-face meeting, Professor Say. But unfortunately, Professor explained that he is not working on this issue anymore. Also, I'd like to especially emphasize our Russian authors who contributed, Natalia Valerina Yeromina, Igor Nikolaevich Barligin, Sergei Lidenko, Tarasenko, and many other authors who provided in-depth analysis, which are also included in my thesis. Certainly used scientific journals with sound academic reputation, and the results of my study relatively recent. I studied a relatively recent thesis written on this theme. The mechanism of their interaction, or new and development of future development, European integration. So the scope of questions which have not been well covered by the national historiography, and as I mentioned earlier, the new document was introduced, and I would also know the practical significance of the work of thesis will enable to analyze the international aspect of activity of such parties. Next, I'd like to proceed to provisions set for defense. I shall not read them again, and I will proceed straight to conclusion. Of course, it's necessary that in the beginning of the 21st century, extreme right parties interesting for researchers because of their strengthening growing role. And today it's possible to say that it's international level because a legitimate field and not limited to the work in European Parliament. A good combination of issues of internal development with external activity, active reaction to external challenges, and quick adaptation for the electors. So these has impact on the growth of number of their supporters. And for the national rally parties, present is Marine Le Pen. After 2017 managed maybe to start a new epoch in the development of this party, because it changed the name of the party to the National Rally, and she rethinking her previous experience and mistakes and today's reality, which brought European agenda. As for the Independence Party in the UK, here we may conclude that the party is declining now because the main agenda, Brexit, has been implemented, and as a result, at the moment the party has not found a relevant agenda, and well, this of course has some impact on how it positions itself in the political arena, and the analysis of growth, which in turn are reflected in Euro and anti-globalist moods, strengthen their positions at the national extreme right parties are ready for the new stage of international cooperation. Political climate, on the one hand, fosters Eurosceptics ideas, on the other hand, creates challenges for EU leaders because many political decisions to be taken depend on if the trend of disintegration will grow stronger or European integration will become stronger. So Brexit provided new tools to the extreme right parties quick formation of extreme right coalition is not a new story, but these unions did not live long before. It should be mentioned that today the general political trend is that strengthening this cooperation and hold on a second. And among the factors that contribute to the interaction of the extreme right parties, I should mention popularity of Eurosceptic Brexit, similar views on protection of the national sovereignty, the idea immigration, protection of the national currency, exit from European Union, and at the same time, the main factor which interrupts their work is their heterogeneity. The parties are very heterogeneous. That is why they don't have a permanent ideological basis. In my study, I concluded that the main form of interaction is working in the European Parliament, the new forms such as political movements such as Pegida, and in the past 5 years, the number of personal meetings between extreme right parties increased, conferences and meetings. They're working more actively with mass media and some other communications. Political parties traditionally they want an opportunity to interact with different spheres. This is especially important for parties with some influence. The European Union provided a solid base platform for such interaction as the European Parliament, and certainly this platform fosters activization of the far-right parties and of their interaction. So it should be mentioned that one of the existing current trends is that this cooperation will continue and will stay relevant in the future. And interaction of intellectual thinking of parties entering the international arena and interaction, which is solving specific tasks and lobbying interests at many levels and positions. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that relevance of this issue will stay unchanged, and new global challenges such as coronavirus pandemic and other challenges call for interaction of European governments taking well-motivated decisions, and for extreme right parties as well. Thank you for your attention. My presentation is over. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, since the procedure we're still working on the procedure, I missed some important points which usually presented by the Secretary of the Dissertation Council. I think you remember the procedure, because I mean the applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary full package of documents. All the documents comply with the applicable requirements, clause 12, section 3 of the order, and all the documents comply with the requirements, are stored in the applicant's attestation file, and copies are available from the officer of the Dissertation Council Support Department, Irina Vasilievna Karasova, who is currently in touch with us. And question which I had to ask a little earlier, is there a need to read the whole list of documents, which is quite long, or can we proceed to the next stage and proceed to asking questions to Anzhela Olegovna and ask the traditional questions, or shall we ask questions in turn? I think let's proceed to the second part of our session. I'm sure all the papers are in order. So let's agree with this and proceed to questions. And Anzhela Olegovna will tell us if she would like to write down all questions and answer them all together, or she'd like to answer each question individually. Nikolai Muradovich, thank you for giving me the two options. I would prefer to sum up all the questions and answer them all together. Okay, then the members of the Destination Council, please ask your questions. Shall we? We quite few. Alexander Yurievich, I can see you and we can hear. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I have the following question. In your thesis, and you didn't maybe you didn't mention that, but in your thesis, you have a chapter on the interaction of extreme right parties with our country, with Russia, and yet, for some reason, you did not mention the conference of the right parties, which took place in our city several years ago, and representatives of parties. Why you didn't mention this in your thesis? Alexander Yurievich, let me sum up all the questions. Okay, dear colleagues, what other questions do we have? Ruslan Vasilyevich, please. I have one question. Why studying international dimension of activity of extreme right parties, you chose such incomparable with each other extreme right parties? Speaking of their role in the political life. Thank you for your question. Dear colleagues, do we have more questions? I don't. We don't. Okay, then I have a practical question, maybe. The trend for unification we may observe among the right and the left-wing parties, especially considering the recent events which we are witnessing not only in the US, but around the world. And in your opinion, and it would be good if you can give some proof, what will happen first? Consolidation of the right, and they will make a union European party, or left, who have their own answers to questions that are on today's agenda. Thank you. Thank you for all the questions. Let me clarify once again. Are these all the questions? Are these all the questions? Maybe I will ask one more question. With whom of Russian political parties, in your opinion, your subjects interact? Maybe, and this is significant, but about the French party, which is able to adapt, with whom does it cooperate in Russia? Thank you once again for your questions. Let me answer questions in the same order as they were asked. The first question, indeed, I thank for the comment that information about the international Russian Conservative Forum in November 2015 in St. Petersburg, unfortunately, was not included in the chapter on cooperation with Russia. And so, indeed, this forum took place in St. Petersburg, and representatives of the following party: Finnish, Swedish, Greek, British National Party, Bulgarian, and a number of other parties, which should be noted have more radical nature, and also parties, representatives of experts were present who of Russian nature, and that is why, in my opinion, as it seems to me, was natural that in the framework of Marine Le Pen and a national rally and of independents were not present at this session because of their political agenda and their task to softening the party image, making it less radical. It's true about Marine Le Pen and that decline. So this and taking part in this such a forum would not be good. So in general, it's quite scandalous situation which emerged. A number of letters has been sent by experts who asked for this forum not to be held, and the forum indeed had somewhat indeed provided a platform for quite radical comments. Quite radical comments were made. Okay, I see. I think that's very important. The author knows about the forum and has her own opinion on this. She knows the challenges this event created, and that demonstrates competence, knowledge of an issue immediately connected with the theme of her study. Please answer the second question. Question by Ruslan Vasilyevich. I agree with this comment, but on the other hand, I'd like to say that while choosing the theme of my thesis, this first international reaction to Brexit started, and as general talks of future domino effect, and despite the different backgrounds of the two parties in the local political establishment, comparing the impact in European political space seemed interesting to me. In addition, I think it would be possible to compare the situation with the, on the one hand, traditionally called Euro-optimistic and Euro-skeptical, and this added certain relevance to this dimension and a novelty. And also, I'd like to say that in general, while doing my study, the interest of these two parties, I became interested. So first I studied the National Front, the National Rally, the independence, and comparing certain aspects. And as a result, it was logical to transfer my experience to a thesis. Thank you. And I think there was one more question, right? Yes, Nikolai Muratovich, your question about what forces will prevail, consolidation, right or left? Honestly speaking, the last challenge events which are still happening in the US, they create a significant challenge, and at the same time I think that looking at activity of the extreme right parties and consolidation of the nature of consolidation of their interests before these events, we should observe reactive nature of these parties. They adapt quite quickly for challenges created by the international agenda. In that way, they manage to soften or redirect their interests towards what is popular or not popular. And I think that the right parties will stick together, will continue their work, and will consolidate their actions to further promote run joint activities, and how, for example, Marine Le Pen, she abandoned other aspects, softening her agenda, maybe criticizing the active government in France. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, we may proceed to the reviews of the Dissertation Council members, which you have at hand. As for external reviews, no, it's not a must, and they're not obligatory, and in our case, no external reviews have been received. May I, Irina Vladimirovna? Thank you, Nikolai Mratic, for giving the floor to me. And here's my review. Analysis of extreme right parties is always relevant. The theme of the is relevant also because the study of extreme right parties never touch upon the stature of global and regional development. Despite the growing significance of parties, they don't get the proper critical evaluation and approaches the study of European processes, and do not take into account the European experience, but European parties play a significant role. Extreme right parties make an important part of European, and they represent a growing number of immigrants, and it's become a key which excessive of the purpose of the thesis by Liubimova and Olegovna was to determine factors, forms, and mechanisms of interaction of extreme right parties in Europe in the context of European and globalizing processes. The goal, as the author says, is achieved through the study of parties' national union and independence, which represent the most significant far-right forces and serve as an illustrative example for the consideration of this issue. Page 6 of the thesis. Definition of the subject and object of the thesis, because no doubt, synchronous and diachronic methods used in the thesis to analyze the relationship between the process of globalization and European or the right-wing radicals and impact of these processes on the development of the international cooperation. In this study, a comparative historical method was used, which the author investigated the evolution and changes in the position of the political parties and actors depending on the events of a certain historical period. The functional approach allowed the author to identify the dependence of development of political parties on a variety of changes. The source base of the research is quite extensive. Anzhela Olegovna collected a sufficient body of sources in Russian, English, and French, which allowed her to conduct a deep and objective analysis of the problem of extreme right parties in Western Europe in the international dimension. The main ones used doctrines of the far-right parties, National Rally, 2012-2017, and UK Independence Party for 2015-2017. Literature collected by the author in Russian, English, and French, 141 titles in total, helped the author to comprehensively study the problem of the international dimension of the activities of the far-right parties. The thesis consists of an introduction, 3 chapters, a conclusion, and a list of sources and literature, and annexes. Each chapter contains conclusion, which is very well for the thesis and for the author. The first chapter of the study devoted to the analysis of extreme right radicalism, its ideological and institutional foundations, the author rightly claims the significance of the concept of charismatic leadership for the far-right parties becomes particularly relevant in with the growth of electoral attractiveness. The second chapter, the author analyzes international European agenda of the extreme right-wing parties in the context of globalization and European integration. And for the extreme right-wing parties, foreign policy is a tool to increase the effectiveness of domestic policy, as well as most likely reflects the national interests of the state. Page 58 of the thesis. In the third chapter of the thesis, the author studied international cooperation of extreme right parties, forms of cooperation in the European Parliament. In the third paragraph of the third chapter, the author concludes that the international experience helps the extreme right parties to solve their domestic political agenda, page 88 of the thesis. We may agree with the author's opinion that the growth of Euroscepticism and aggravation of the domestic political problems, such as the immigration policy, served as the ground for the emergence of new forms of cooperation, such as Pegida. Scientific novelty of the thesis by Liubimova, Anzhela, Olegovna on the theme international dimension of EU extreme right parties' performance is obvious, in our opinion, and lies in the following propositions. Studying international activity, extreme right wing parties and mechanisms identified all the new forms of cooperation of extreme right wing parties. Next, for the first time, introduced new documents such as the interview taken by the author of the thesis with Marie Le Pen. However, we'd like to draw the attention to a number of controversial issues. First, could you name mechanism of interaction of the extreme right parties in Europe in the context of European and globalizing processes? Second, can you make a portrait of an average voter for the National Rally in France and UK Independence Party? Are there any what are the similarities and differences? Third, there are three differences in the the difference in the policy of extreme right party in Europe and in NATO. And do the political views of the party leaders of the extreme right-wing parties differ on issues of international cooperation? The thesis by Liubimova, Anzhela, Olegovna on the theme international dimension of the EU extreme right party's performance, case study for the French National Rally and UK Independence Party, meets the basic requirements set by the order the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on the procedure for awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Liubimova, Anzhela, Olegovna deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate historical political science, specialty 23004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development, clause 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Thank you. Thank you, Irina Vladimirovna. Anzhela, Olegovna, will you please answer questions? Remember about the time limit, so you should make your answers short. Sound. Thank you, Irina Vladimirovna, for your questions and comments, and I will try to make my answers very concise and clear about the mechanism of interaction. Indeed, we can identify first joint political actions, leader meeting, conferences and rallies, forums, and separately I'd like to mention as a new form, joint fraction in the European Parliament. In my opinion, this mechanism of international cooperation, case of extreme right parties are the main, and they are described in my thesis. Let us proceed to the second question. Can I compare a portrait of an average voter? Yes, of course, an average voter for the National Rally as a resident of a small city, maybe military, maybe an owner of a small business. Often among the voters, there are voters have no education, no higher education, 25 to 60 average age. And speaking of geographical, is north and south of France, such as Nice and Marseille. and where immigration problem is pressing. And as for the shared ideas, so strengthening the national interests and security. As for a UK Independence Party, the voter portrait looks very similar. They are maybe people whose interests are not well covered by the activity of traditional parties, small business owners, veterans, and those affected by the immigration problem. Let me proceed to the third question about the differences. Should be that in relation to NATO, there are differences, but they have to do with details. So if we talk about Jean-Marie Le Pen, she wants to withdraw from NATO, but in her speeches, she changed, or actually she made some changes in her agenda. For example, when Donald Trump, so how will NATO policy change? And she definitely insists that this dialogue is impossible without Russia and Vladimir Vladimirovich taking part in it. And so she considers Vladimir Vladimirovich and Donald Trump her allies. But her recent statements is sovereignty is important for France, and rather than promotion of U.S. agenda in Europe. As for UK, no sharp comments against NATO have ever been made, and the nature of Nigel Farage and Donald Trump is, and here would not be exactly correct. And the last example, the last difference between the national rally is how NATO is seen through a relationship with Russia. And the second is support of the national interest rather than external interests of US and financial issues, which we may see in Germany as well. And the final question asked by Irina Vladimirovna, questions on views of international cooperation. As the views are different, cooperation with Russia, here is necessary to say that there's a number of parties which vote for Western European extreme right parties, and negative, of course, negative opinion, which is also expectable, as Eastern European extreme right parties, National Rally, Austrian Freedom Party, and League representatives are quite friendly, which unlike Estonian, for example, party, which is obvious. And secondly, is the NATO position, which we discussed earlier. And the third point is a relationship to initiative of the extreme right political movements. And I'd like to expand on this a little later, answering question asked by Ruslan Vasilyevich. Thank you, Anzhela Olegovna. I'm absolutely satisfied with your answers. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Then maybe we can give the floor to Ruslan Vasilyevich. Ruslan Vasilyevich, since your name was already mentioned, the thesis by Anzhela Olegovna Liubimova dedicated to a relevant theme, extreme right, Eurosceptical moods in different parts of EU is an undeniable fact, which combined the results of recent elections to the European Parliament and the progress of the extreme right at the national level. The trend is also typical, first of all, for France, where the far-right National Rally became the most popular political party, and for the UK as well, where the Independence Party played a crucial role in the victory of Brexit supporters. the purpose of the thesis was to determine factors, form, and mechanism of interaction of the extreme right parties in Europe in the context of European and globalizing processes. Has undoubted scientific interest, and the tasks of the thesis are clearly stated by Anzhela Olegovna, coped with these tasks. The introduction says that the degree applicant is quite familiar with the works and extreme activity of extreme right parties. Its number of sources includes European Parliament documents, etc. Obviously, the work has scientific novelty because the author managed to demonstrate the international development of European extreme right parties as a case study for two European parties. In her work, the author identified the ideological peculiarities of the extreme right parties, mentioned the tendency to change, identifying several types of such parties and of their views, evolution of their views, and the author identified factors of influence of globalization, European integration, and development of the far-right movement. Conclusions made in chapter 2 of the thesis became a factor of pan-European policy, page 53, is logical and corresponds to reality. The author carefully examines foreign and European issues, comparing approaches of French and British extreme right parties to the key issues of international relations, including the modern world order and security issues and European construction. This is even more important because these parties use their political Euroscepticism and rejection of the European Union. So, author's paragraph on the views of the extreme right party in relations with Russia is also interesting. From the point of the title, the third chapter is of international cooperation, is of great value. This chapter shows specific types, forms, and mechanisms of cooperation between the National Rally and UK independence with other extreme right parties, especially in the case of leading French extreme right parties within pan-European transnational political associations. Here it should be noted that the author demonstrated that the National Rally, such as this predecessor, National Front, played an important role in the integration process of the extreme right flank. Scientific novelty lies in the fact that the author analyzes horizontal connections of political parties in question with mass public organizations. At the same time, we should agree with the author, with Anzhela Olegovna, that the most important factor that hinders cooperation of European extreme right parties is their heterogeneity. In general, we may conclude that Anzhela Olegovna Liubimova submitted an independent study that contributes to the scientific literature on extreme right-wing political. At the same time, speaking of comments, first comment is connected with my question, which I have already asked. Why did the author choose such forces as example for studying international dimension of activities? It's not only because National Rally, as I mentioned already today, is one of the most popular parties in France, while independence in the UK is in a crisis and will most likely disappear, as the author herself admitted. But since her main task it has accomplished, but it's also important that in modern history, National Front and National Rally, they tried to play a systematic role on all levels of the political life in France, while Independence Party in the UK, with the exception of a very short period, Brexit and Putin, its decisions, it was of an expert character and became active only during the elections to European Parliament. In other words, its unique experience cannot be extrapolated on the extreme right movement of Europe in general. As has already been mentioned, paragraph in chapter 2 dedicated to the relationship with Russia is useless, but maybe here it would make sense to show in more detail the role of Russia in the world. And in my opinion, the author should have paid more attention to creation of European extreme right party, Identity and Democracy, even more so that the role of French National Rally in this rebranding seems to be very important. Also, the author should have paid more attention to international contacts outside Europe. Here, for example, independence connection with the right-wing Republican circles in the United States. And there are various contacts in South America, in Middle East. And the author should have touched upon the relationship with the supported by conservative American intellectuals project by Bannon of the Global Far-Right Information Political Movement, which the author omitted. And there are some annoying inaccuracies, such as the author says that in the leadership of Austria, which is no longer true. They are in opposition today. Also, it's somewhat surprising that the list of sources is limited to 20 titles. Of course, the most important ones for the theme, but the work would have benefited if the author used more writings of extreme right French politicians and statements on international issues. However, these comments do not fundamentally affect the overall positive assessment of the study and the thesis by Anzhela and Liubimova on the theme International Dimension of the EU Extreme Right Party's Performance, a case study of the French National Rally and the UK Independence Party, complies with the requirements set by the order 6821/1 and the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and thus the degree applicant Anzhela Olegovna deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of political sciences, academic specialty, political problems, international relations, global and regional development. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Ruslan Vasilyevich. Anzhela Olegovna, please answer. Ruslan Vasilyevich, thank you for your questions. Though, of course, I would like to, your questions are very interesting. To your first question, I have already answered. As for the author should have been defined. Thank you for the question. And indeed, I did not pay enough attention. However, I'd like to note that statements of Marine Le Pen and her attitude to, while Nigel Farage is quite seldom, so, and the nature of attitude can be described as neutral and open to Russia. At the same time, foreign factor has a role here, that in mass media 2016, a great number of articles which discussed the influence of how Russia influenced the elections in the USA and the results, and the election of Donald Trump, and not very logical articles for Nigel Farage to say something positive about the cooperation, the relations with Russia. For example, the Chicago Tribune, all these statements have no evidence, are unevidenced. That is why it's more neutral, more open, but the climate created by mass media is not was not quite correct for this statement to be more accurate. The next question, of course, I absolutely agree with this comment on the role of the national rally in rebranding of a fraction. Here, I'd like to add, unfortunately, that I completed my thesis before elections were held in 2019, and the creation of Identity and Democracy Party, and because of bureaucracy, so this inaccuracy is also true about Austria. So the situation has changed. So in a nutshell, let me say that Identity and Democracy took the 5th place, and they have increased the number of deputies, representatives, have like 36 before, and the role of Jean-Marie Le Pen is the fraction is accepted new members, and Marine Le Pen acts as a consolidating agent because some leaders maybe they have not worked with this policy of softening their statements. So, for example, if we are in European Parliament, you would not be accepted to advocate exit from European Union. So here, Le Pen demonstrated other alternatives and softened the overall perception of the fractions, where she assumed the role of a leader, though she's not the chairman. And here, I'd like to say that this is a very important trend, and despite a number of different opinions inside, they are focusing on the main agenda of European democracy. And one more clarification, as Stephen Bannon's, indeed, this is a very interesting case. In 2016, as ex-advisor of Donald Trump and the head of his election campaign, here in the summer of 2018, active work started and opinions differed. So Belgium supported, Madrid Kamen supported Matteo Salvini also supported, but he was Marine Le Pen and Jörg Neuten were quite cautious, and the analytical reports are ready, but Europeans will run their policy themselves further. And here it should be mentioned that what influenced here, of course, this policy, first of all, national interests and personality of Stephen Bannon, who makes very strong statements, and some statements even Nigel Farage did not permit himself, and financing, of course. But in the right wings, it's very important for the right wing parties for their financing to be transparent. So, of course, I can continue talking about this. But in the future, of course, Stephen Bannon will continue talking about this, but I haven't seen the results so far. And as for Austria, very briefly, is not true after the issue of Russian trace was identified, Vice Chancellor, which resulted in Austrian National Party. But now Sebastian Kurz is in power, and of course, during the conflict, many that know he will not work with Austrian Freedom Party in the future, I believe. And as for the your last comment about a short list of sources, I thank for this comment, but I'd like to say that in the framework of my study, I carefully analyzed the source base and used all the materials available relevant for my thesis. And the international situation, international cooperation is not so well covered by documents. But let me say again that in the past years, this theme got more attention, and now there are more new sources. New sources became available. So I have answered your questions. Thank you, Anzhela Olegovna. Dear colleagues, the situation is that I would like to present my review in the end, and I would like to give the floor to Alexander Yurevich or Aigerim Nuralievna. Alexander Yurevich, please take the floor. Dear colleagues, I will not talk about the thesis once again because we know it quite well. We have all read, and which is good. And as for literature and what could be done, of course, but the most important thing, in my opinion, is what the author managed to do is getting primary information, such as the interview with Le Pen the Elder and a number of other interviews. And so that means this work is on a high modern level, conducted on the international material, and models, results obtained seem to be very interesting. And in the beginning, the parties advocated certain focus on their own countries, but they soon understood that the European Union is an interesting platform for the joint statements. And so the politicians such as Le Pen removed this item from their agenda. And I think it's very important, the English party, that sometimes when you achieve your goal, what is next? So it's necessary to set new goals. As for comments, which one I have already mentioned, so I'd like to add something. Here I'm very glad that there's one more question. Who was the organizer in our party, Russia, or did they come from another city? Who organized this initiative, which resulted, so we know the consequences today. And as for the thesis, in the thesis itself, on page 46, I found the fallen religious is a threat to European countries. And so this phrase does not agree with the position of any far right. Does it mean that this is the position of the author itself, or is she the author quoting? And there are some repetitions in the text. For example, Nigel Farage was able to persuade David Cameron to hold a referendum, the results of which took many by surprise. So this sentence we come across on pages 41 and 67. So there was only one statement, but the author should be more careful with the strange phrases, the meaning of which is difficult. For example, on page 18, are certain parties genealogically or historically fascist? To what extent and how do modern right-wing radicals ideologically maintain this link with the national socialism and fascism? And the answers to these questions are the main difficulty among academics and political scientists. Or how exactly is meant by academics and political science, it remains a mystery. So this is not clear. And or a phrase on page 61, in 2015, Pegidus had a split, but didn't lose his scientific interest. So this phrase is hard to understand, but of course, These remarks have no impact on the overall positive impression made by the thesis. In my opinion, is primary information. A complex study, complete corresponds to requirements applied to such types of works, and conclusions. And generally speaking, the thesis by Liubimova, Anzhela, Olegovna, political problem, is a complete scientific paper, and the thesis deserves to be awarded the degree. Thank you. Alexander Yurevich, thank you. The previous question, as the organizer, formal organizer, cultural center, People's House, and there is information that actually it is patronized by Motherland Party. This is according to my information. Next, let me follow your questions. First, but the first phrase on page 46. Let me add that the meaning of this phrase does not reflect the position of the author. Here I'm talking about the not uncontrolled flow of illegal immigrants of other cultural values and other religious beliefs, which increased in 2015, resulted in a great number of conflicts, which had certain impact, and violence resulted in violence, and mass media often as threats of illegal refugees being a threat to security of European Union, but similar statements were made by leaders of the extreme right parties. And next, about the repetition of the same phrase, pages 41 and 67. This is inaccuracy. Of course, I thank you for this comment. And next, let me explain the phrase on page 18 and 61. In the first case, I'm talking about the political and extreme right parties and their predecessors, fascist parties. And here, political scientists are looking for synonyms, maybe not very good, and they for scientific community or academic circles. So that will be better. And the final phrase about the Pegida survived the split, but as a subject of the study, she remained interesting for the scientific community. And let me give the floor to Aigerim Nuralevna. Welcome. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear. The thesis, my review to the thesis by intention of on the case study of the French National Rally, the UK Independence Party, submitted for the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Academic Specialization 230004, Political Problems of International Relations, Global and Regional Development. In the beginning of the 21st century, became the rise of extreme right endures and challenges of latest decades, and incapacity of European governments manage with them, which presented extreme right parties. So before everything affected migration policy, extreme right successfully generate political database and submit political agenda to national European levels, which enabled them to continue their development within the framework within international cooperation. The choice of National Rally and Independence Party in UK is quite successful. First, many decades as a well-respected party, and second party managed to implement one of the main ideas, Brexit. Their evolution, stages of development, and mechanisms deserve special attention for the understanding of the modern pan-European agenda. Study of the thesis by Liubimova and Anzhela Olegovna allows you to give rated, full-fledged, new, independent, scientifically qualified research. The relevance of the work causes no doubt. There's an obvious trend of the active far-right influences. International measuring has not been properly studied in the scientific literature. The thesis consists of 3 chapters: conclusions, a list of sources in literature, as well as annexes, information described logically in each order. Each has conclusions. The relevance of the research topic is clearly reflected in the introduction. A review of pays special attention. The author uses literature in Russian and foreign languages. Special interest is in the use of interview with the former National Front Jean-Marie Le Pen, taken by the author. The use of this source is extremely important. It's very relevant. So the author introduces in the scientific circulation a new document. Also, in the introduction, the author defines the thesis by Liubimova and Anzhela Olegovna is a independent scientific work. The author managed to solve the task, and the conclusions are reliable. And regardless these advantages, I'd like to draw attention to some critical remarks and points for discussion. First, how do you assess possible developments for Marine Le Pen, the upcoming presidential election 2022, about which she already made a statement, considering her previous experience in the elections of 2012 and 2017. Second, there is a number of inaccuracies in the work. Elections, the European Parliament in 2019 is no longer up to date. And finally, could you comment on activity on Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage in 2019 to date? How will you evaluate it, considering the changes in the current ones? These comments don't affect these are more recommendations in the work of the fundamental scientific research deserves high rating and is recommended by foreign and domestic companies, experts, and academics. The thesis by Liubimova and Anzhela Olegovna on the theme international dimension of EU extreme right parties, a case study of the French National Rally and the UK Independent Party, corresponds to the main requirements set by the order of the 1st of 9, 2017, 6821/1 of the order of awarding academic degrees in Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Liubimova and Anzhela Olegovna deserves to be awarded the academic degree of candidate of political science, special academic specialization 23004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the order. Thank you. That's all I had to say. Anzhela Olegovna, will you please answer? Okay. Angelina Moralivna, thank you for your questions. So I shall try to. Marine Le Pen indeed announced that she will run for presidency in 2022. So I believe there are reasons to believe that she will take part in rounds 1 and 2. But if she misses, I think maybe the new leader will emerge, or maybe her cousin Marianne Le Pen. And now, at the moment, she's changing her agendas, watching what's falling, what's happening, criticizing actions of the acting government regarding the pandemic. So that will depend, everything will depend on how the latest events, she's very active and fully acting exactly the same as before. As for Nigel Farage, I think here the situation will be. So that was the first question about Marine Le Pen. And next question regarding mistake but coming elections for European Parliament. I have already answered this question earlier because my work was published earlier. And the third question, activity of Marine Le Pen and Nigel Farage. Marine Le Pen will run for presidency. She's active in February 2020. It's Aria Vite, which was so here we'll see how the situation will change with this Aria Zapchast situation. And Nigel Farage, after he retired from Independence UK, he registered the Brexit Party with after Brexit actually took place. He withdrew from European Parliament and continues his policy, continues his TV show, and the idea to through Brexit, and still advocates the idea through Brexit and the impact of integration in European Union. Thank you for your questions. Thank you. I'm satisfied with your answers. Thank you. Anzhela Olegovna, let me present my review, and under the existing regulation, I don't have to read the entire review. Let me proceed straight to some questions and comments. First question is, which jumped into my eye as I was reading the thesis, is there's too many tasks which can be summed up to the goal, but the number of tasks is too big. There are 7 scientific tasks, each of which could be a subject of a serious study for over a long period of time. On the one hand, in conclusion, I mentioned that on the one hand, this is clearly an achievement of the author, because this shows her academic ambition, but on the other hand, such abundance of tasks somewhat reduced affected the depth of to which she studied each task. I don't know if this is a comment. I included this in the remarks section, but this is of course, the right of the author. The second point. It's very important that the right-wing parties have impact not on the elections, but they also give their opinions on the relevant issues of political and social agenda. So here, my opinion is different from the opinion of the author. You emphasized the role of the right parties during the elections, but recently they became quite active over current and even non-strategic issues. And the final conclusion is the relevance of the study of right-wing parties, and ultra is beyond any doubt. The prospect for staying in the for the right-wing parties is obvious. The trend of the world development and those, so they remain relevant. So I made the following conclusion without any significant criticism. I made the following conclusion that the thesis by Liubimova, Anzhela Olegovna, and the theme into national directions of EU extreme right parties fully corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order on the procedure of one academic degrees at our university of the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, and the degree applicant, Liubimova Anzhela Olegovna, deserves to be awarded the degree of candidate of political science, academic specialization 230004, political problems of international relations, global and regional development. Clause 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. And since I don't have any significant remarks, I don't know if there is a need for Anzhela Olegovna to answer my points, my remarks. Nikolai Muratovich, thank you for your comments. Your comment about the number of tasks set. Yes, indeed, the number is great, but the tasks are all connected with each other. It was impossible to, without considering the ideological basis, it was impossible to compare the two parties. So that's how the number of tasks grew so big. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I found myself in this situation. So I thank you for your comments. Dear colleagues, following our procedure, I have to read not only my review, but also as a chairman of the council, make some conclusions. And because, as we know, we're talking about awarding an academic degree, not only the results of the thesis submitted for defense, but on performance of the degree applicant at this session. And here, let me give my opinion. The performance of the degree applicant, Anzhela Olegovna, at the session corresponds to written and unwritten requirements applied at the university and in general in the academic community. And let me give the floor to the organizer, maybe not of all the victories, because Natalia Valerievna has her own victories, of course, but in this case, we are talking about the academic advisor who made a significant contribution to the work of Anzhela Olegovna. Natalia Valerievna, the floor is yours. I'm very pleased to advocate Anzhela Olegovna, who worked very hard on her thesis, was very involved, very interested, provided original data, and so she proved to be a very passionate young researcher, which I certainly loved. The thesis itself is written on a relevant topic because this is a political force which is populist and radical movements, nationalist movements, and in the past 15 years they became more popular. They get more supporters. They use the contradictions that exist in European Union regarding European integration and internal contradictions. And so these aspects, immigration, in even the anti-American position, which is very often mentioned, we can often see in these statements. So they create a basis for interaction. So they enabled the parties to group together, and so they became a political force, the voice of which became more noticeable and can be heard outside the European Union, national, but maybe it didn't get due academic attention, for which Anzhela Olegovna tried to make up. The thesis is dedicated to this complex issue, how extreme right parties make their contribution to making political decisions, and how they enter European Parliament. Also, the thesis makes a significant contribution to national science because it follows the evolution, compares the approaches, and there are no such studies. No such studies have been conducted before, and the basis of international cooperation and conflicts between them. The author compares ideologies of different parties, attitude to other countries, other states. It's very important that the thesis contains many original sources, such as the above mentioned interview, and so the complex aspect is not available. And in addition to that, Anzhela Olegovna uses various theoretical approaches and suggests her own original view. Practical and theoretical value deserves very high opinion, very high rankings. And so I would like to advocate Anzhela Olegovna. I think she deserves to be awarded the degree. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia Valina. We have not received any external questions, so we have the right to proceed, maybe not to the longest, but to the most important part of our work, to vote in. For that, I would like to only the members of the Dissertation Council and or other members of this others present at this session have to leave or stop, switch them, have to leave our conference. I don't think that will take a long time. Anzhela Olegovna, you also have to leave us. I think that will only take a minute. So let us wait till colleagues leave us.
Да, но пока мы по регламенту имеем право уточнить следующий вопрос. Есть ли какие-то вопросы по процедуре защиты?
No, in the meantime, I may ask you the question, Nikolai Maratovich. Online broadcasting is switched off, so we have to wait and voting shall be opened. Thank you. I'm back. So now we may proceed to the open individual voting. And dear council members, we have discussed the issue. So for the protocol and for video, and please give your opinions on whether the thesis by Liubimova, Anzhela Olegovna, corresponds to the earlier mentioned requirements on, and whether it is possible or impossible, in your opinion, to award to Anzhela Olegovna the academic degree of candidate of political science, academic specialty 230004. I agree. I am for. I'm also for. Agrim Nurlina, yes, I agree. Ruslan Vasilovich, yes, I agree. Well, dear colleagues, since our session was held in the remote access mode, I have a question. Do dissertation council members or the degree applicant or others present have any questions or comments regarding the procedure? No, we don't have any comments, no questions. Then let me, on behalf of all of you, dear colleagues, congratulate Anzhela Olegovna on being awarded the degree of candidate of political science at St. Petersburg University. So 2 victories at the same time. She's won 2 battles, and wish her success with her further research in this field, in this sphere. We congratulate the applicant, and we would like to give her some time for her closing remarks. Nikolai Maratovich, members of the Dissertation Council, I thank you for your attention, for your genuine interest, for constructive criticism, suggestions, and for the discussion, which is interesting for me and hopefully for you. You personally, Nikolai Maratovich, for being the leader of today's session. For me, it was this great honor that Natalia Valerievna Yeronimina is my academic advisor. It's a piece of luck that I met her in my academic pathway. So thankful for many years for the great contribution, for positive and productive and interesting work. Natalia Valerievna, many thanks to you. This is invaluable. Your contribution is invaluable. Also, I would like to thank all the employees of our faculty, Department of World Politics, European Studies, Theory of History, all our faculty, Novikova Irina Nikolaevna, who for me, for almost 10 years, as a long period for me, they have all contributed, so I'm very proud to be a student and a graduate. I'm very grateful to my colleagues for the opportunity to obtain primary data. The Dissertation Council Support Department for organizing smooth document flow, and also I very briefly would like to thank my family for their support, and also I'd like to emphasize I'm proud to be a graduate of St. Petersburg University, School of International Relations, and I hope that the same trend and the school is also satisfied with its graduates. Thank you all for your attention once again. Thank you. Thank you, Anzhela, Olegovna, dear colleagues. Thank you very much. I thank everybody for taking part in today's session, and I ask to stop online broadcasting. Thank you.